When Buddha was alive, he said to the Kalamas, "Now look, you Kalamas, be not misled by report or tradition or hearsay. Be not misled by proficiency in the collections, nor by reason of logic, nor after reflection on and approval of some theory, nor because it conforms with one's inclination, nor out of respect for the prestige of a teacher. But Kalamas, when you know for yourself, these things are unwholesome, these things are blameworthy, these things are censured by the intelligent, these things when practiced and observed conduce to loss and sorrow, then indeed do ye reject them. But if at any time you know of yourselves, these things are wholesome, they are blameless, they are praised by the intelligent, these things when practiced and observed conduce to welfare and happiness, then Kalamas, do ye, having practiced them, abide therein."
Many longtime listeners know that our podcast platform was initially focused on interviews about the many spiritual paths that Myanmar offers meditators and monastics. But when the coup hit, we couldn't in good conscience continue to tell those stories, with many monastic sites on fire or occupied by soldiers, and the Burmese people living under the military's reign of terror. So we expanded our mission to cover a wider range of post-coup Myanmar stories. Still, some guests have a unique insight into both the intersection of the spiritual with the worldly, allowing a deeper understanding of both planes. Today's guest squarely fits in that category, as you will soon hear. Let's get to that interview now. I'm really pleased on this episode of Insight Myanmar Podcast to welcome a very special guest, Sunda Khin, who will be talking about her life as well as the life of her father, who was a very important figure in Burmese history, Chan Htoon. We'll be hearing a lot about him and his developments and his influence on the Burmese nation and people, and what Sunda Khin has been doing in her wake, in the wake of her father's legacy. So with that, Sunda, thank you so much for taking the time to join and chat with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So there's so much in your life as well as your father's life. These are really two biographies to get into, as well as some of your brothers all have had some mark on Burmese history as it's passed through these past few decades. But let's get to your father first. There's many aspects of his life that are quite important and quite significant to talk about. Let's first of all just learn a brief biographical sketch of who he was, where he came from. If you can talk about a brief basic biography of your father, and then we'll get into some more detail about some of the more significant parts of his life and his work.
All right. To begin talking about my dad, he comes from Pyapong, a very middle-class family, and he grew up. He was the only son and the youngest of a family of about, I think, 5. And I must say, he's a self-made person, because when he went to school in Pyapong, and the schools were not as good for language, English, as well as other subjects as in Yangon. But he did pass the matriculation. He did not pass the matriculation there, but he found through his cousin that he could go to Sri Lanka, Ceylon at that time, and study at it's called Ananda College, and it is in Colombo. And somehow he managed to go to study there, and he did. And when he got there, he sat for the matriculation from there, and he stood second in the whole island. And he passed the exam, and he did very well. And then, of course, he came back to Burma, to Yangon. And then he went soon after that, again, he managed to find a way to get to the United Kingdom and to study law. and he went to the I think it's the law, the inner temple, I think, where he was called to become a barrister, which he did, and he I think his concentration was in constitutional law, if I remember right. And then he came back to Burma and got married, and it was an arranged marriage in those days. And he then began his work as a lawyer, but then during that time, he was involved in the nationalist movement with the Myoma National School, which was really the first school that started the movement along with other groups. And so then he got involved and he did that. And at the same time, he was involved in the Young Men's Buddhist Association of Burma, and continued to practice law. Then, in the years of the independence, he was called upon to join the independence movement, and he did. But he did not. He was not a member of the then group called the AFPFL, and he was on the fringes of it, and then he was involved, as far as I know, quite a lot with that, and then drawing up the constitution. But prior to that, before the assassination of General Aung San, and when he was called to be the constitutional advisor, he worked along with General Aung San, and they prior to the independence was, of course, prior to that. I think it was 1948. But what I remember very clearly was that he would have to go to the Secretariat building, which is right now in downtown Yangon. And they would have these meetings, regular cabinet meetings, and he, being the constitutional advisor for the Constituent Assembly, I think, which was required by England, by United Kingdom at that time, prior to giving us independence, and he barely missed the assassination on that fateful day in July. And he was supposed to be there. He always there, sits on the right hand side of General Aung San. But when his car went in, the people who assassinated General Aung San and the cabinet members, that jeep was just coming out, and his car was going in. He had a car and a driver, and so that is also another very important part of his life. So, and then of course as a legal advisor to the then was just like a Rangoon government, I think. I don't know if they were able to control the whole country. I'm not sure about all that, but what I recall was that he was the leftist movement. We had communists in Burma as well, the Burma Communist Party and so forth. And when he had to make a decision, I think, or rather the case that came up from the assassinators, the people who, Uso, for instance, who was behind the assassination of General Aung San, and he was given the death penalty. And my father was the one, and they used to call him in Burmese is Dao Pyo, meaning that you are the guillotine. They were referring to the guillotine, where you are beheaded. So Dao Pyo means that when you do the guillotine, when you have to let go of that, and then the blade or whatever comes and cuts off your head, something like that. So that's a Burmese word. And in the Burmese newspapers, he was very much belied by saying that, oh, this is Chan Htoon, is the one that was the capital punishment. I think that was the very first one. I think was given to Usol, and he was
Right.
he was killed. And so that part was very. Very busy part of my father's life, as
Yeah.
well as those of the members of the cabinet, UNU, and all the other members also. And they were never home. They were always working,
Hmm.
going to meetings and so forth. So I remember that we grew up with people, household staff who took care of us because
Mm.
my father was always gone, and my mother, who's a homemaker, actually, she then got involved with the Karen insurrection movement.
Hmm.
So then I think it wasn't safe up to Insane was, which was about, I don't know how many miles, maybe about 10 miles away
Hmm.
from, when you count from the Sule Pagoda right
Hmm.
up there. At that time, my mother was involved in the women's amenities or something association headed by the prime minister's wife, and they had to go to Insane to take care of the wounded, more or
Hmm.
less, because there was lots of fierce fighting going on, and
Right.
we were not safe. We had to travel with guards, and
Uh-huh.
there was a lot of kidnapping going on at that time, and
Uh-huh.
so those were very turbulent years
Yeah.
for my family and myself. Yes.
Yeah, that's quite an introduction, and I know that there's a lot more beyond that to explore in terms of what your father would go on to do. But just uh, staying for a moment on that period, and also thinking about, your father was a monumental figure in post-war Burmese history, and like some of the other monumental figures, Aung San and UNU, even Ne Win, someone who grew up obviously in the colonial era and came from humble origins, and through hard work and education prowess and the new opportunities that were available, both educational and professional, was able to make a pathway for himself that just simply had never existed in any previous era of Burmese history. And this was also true of his contemporaries, many of those
Yes.
who had found themselves in different positions doing different actions. And so I'm wondering, just to think of three names right now, these are probably the three biggest names of that period whose
Yes.
influence were still shaped by Aung San, UNU, and Ne Win. I'm wondering if your father interacting with these three people, if or perhaps even you yourself as a child meeting these people or knowing them at some point, are there any indications of their personality or their character, or just something that you can't glean from a book?
I would like to start with General Aung San. I never met him, but I know that my father worked with him. And as I was saying, he was assassinated earlier on. My father was working with him. And then of course, he was doing prior to our independence, the Panglong Conference, which my father draft
Mm-hmm.
the those what was the Panglong agreement, and he did that, and then General Aung San was assassinated. But we were close with Do Khin Auntie Do Khin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I was in school, she was the leader of the Girl Scouts.
Mm.
And I remember Auntie Dokinchi attending, conferences somewhere around the world or something. And my parents always told me that this is one person to look up to, is
Mm.
look at this woman and how she has achieved and so
Mm.
forth. And that was before she became she was given the post of ambassador, and even before that. So I knew her in my capacity as a girl guide from my
Mm-hmm.
school. I
Mm.
attended the Methodist missionary school. It's called the Methodist English High School,
Mm-hmm.
and it was that's where I really got my my education throughout, because we had a very how should I say, strict, but not as strict as in the convent schools where I was in the kindergarten and the first, second grades, St. John's Convent, St. Philomena's Convent. And my father decided that it would be best to put us, all the whole family, there were 8 of us, in a school where it was not focused on religion as much, because the convent schools where we had some Irish nuns as well. They were very strict, and of course uniforms and all that, but always the fundraising activities that were not very much enjoyed by my parents. And as being a Buddhist, so we were moved to the Methodist school, Methodist missionary school, and although we did have to attend chapel and all that, it was not something where they forced it upon us, or religion was there. And then I joined the YWCA because they had picnics and it was fun. And we grew up with all of those very good teachers, and I should say it was strict, but it was not that where you were being regimented into anything. So that was it. So Auntie Dokinji, I knew her. My parents, of course, knew her, and they see each other. But I did meet her as a girl guide, and then whenever we have any kind of jamboree or something like that, Auntie Dokinji was there. So I knew. I did not know her children, and of course, Susu, Aung San Suu Kyi, we call her Susu. She was younger, but she did attend the same school, but then I was already, in the high school part of it. And so she then, of course, her mother was assigned as ambassador, so they left the country. So I really didn't know her, but Dokinji very well. Now, as for, you mentioned 2 other names, General Ne Win. General Ne Win, yes, closely, because his, it would be his second wife, I think. Katie is my mother's, I would say cousin in English, but was like, cousin, I would say, because her father, a leading doctor, surgeon, Dr. Batan, is related to my mother, was related, and was her cousin. I think her second cousin or so, or first cousin maybe. And then so Katie was my mother's cousin, but she used to call my mother auntie. So because of the age difference. And then so we knew her, and she went to England and all. And then she married General Ne Win. And then during the years of when the military, what we call the housekeeping, caretaker government, as they were called. At that time, they were living in the government house, which I believe now they purchased or whatever on 80 Road. And I used to go there. They would send the car, pick me up, and would go play Scrabble. And with him and my cousin Mama Katie, she studied in England. She studied nursing, and so she's a very attractive woman, and she's a very charismatic kind of person. We all looked up to her. Among our relatives, she's beautiful. She was very intelligent, and she could talk. She spoke English, of course, fluently. And so when I went there to their house to play Scrabble, I did notice one thing. Of course, General Ne Win did not have the same background as Mama Katie did, and of course myself, because I went to English school and all that. And we would play Scrabble, and he would be laying on the floor also, and we would have all these cushions and everything. And then when it came time for him, when he didn't know a word, he said, well, he needed to be given the turn. But so we said, no, but the thing is, you have to give up that, turn and so on. And he was very much a military kind of a person. And yet, I noticed that he would always be aware of the household staff, mostly were military people, and he would ask Mama Katie, have they been given lunch yet, or things like that. He really cared for these people. But I also know that he was one day he might be like this, and another day he might be. So I noticed this as a young person, and then of course when Mama Katie had the Okalapa Hospital for the first time that was being built and all, and she headed this committee, and we went as teenagers. We would go to sell programs, and all the young girls, most of them were the pretty girls, and I was, because I was a relative and I liked doing these things. So we would go there, and then General Ne Win would be there, and Mama Katie, and then they did these things with where they had these raffles, and then if the raffle won, you can win the sitting at the table with one of the pretty women, and my friend Louisa Benson was one of them, and there was a movie star and all these things, and so they that, and but I did see his personality as being that way. So I used to say to my parents, maybe he has this bipolar, I used to say. And they say, oh, no, he's just military man, self-made, and so forth, and he will be doing great things for the country. So that was a caretaker time. And then everybody loved the army, Dumbledore. And as far as I know, because, there was regimentation, which I later realized, but because of that, the city was clean, regimentation. So every house bring out a broom, sweep the streets, and so forth. And then they built these restaurants along the Strand, and we loved it. Many people welcomed them, and so things were very good. But then, of course, then we had the elections and so on. So the next person, General Ne Win, General Aung San, and did you say UNU or?
Yes. Yep.
UNU definitely very close with my parents. In fact, as a child, I would go into the compound, in Windermere compound, and spend quite a lot of time there when my mother was helping the UNU's wife with foreigners who came, visitors who paid call on her and all. Mommy would help with setting up this, and like there were 2 or 3 other wives of the ministers who came, but my mother on her own, because she was not a cabinet, my father was not a cabinet member, he was just the attorney general, but would do that. And UNU would rely a lot on my father for all these Buddhist things, and particularly when they had the 5th Buddhist Synod, where we convene this very important Buddhist meeting. And so my parents were both involved. But I do know UNU very well, very gentle character. And always we would have some talks. He would laugh at me because he would step over these ants and all. And I said, why are you stepping? He said, no, all living things. He was like that. He lived that kind of life. He was exactly that way, very gentle. And I used to think, how can you be a prime minister? How can you rule a country, which is that we had insurrection here and there? I was thinking to myself, when you are such a, you should be in the Sangha instead of that. And that's how his life was. And he was that way. And I went into the compound, and I know Tomia Yi, his wife, and who was very the opposite. She was strict and this and that, but he was like that. So I did grow up seeing all these things. And then
Uh-huh.
he would do these cultural, they would, and then the minister of culture, which is, you mentioned Timawin, his father was, I think, Minister of Culture, Uwe, at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And they had these cultural visits, exchange from overseas, and these from China, from India, and all these people. And we go to these shows, and it was really beautiful time. The country was going through this. I
Mm-hmm.
thought was a very well. I had a very good life anyway, because my school was a leading. Everybody thought of
Yeah.
the Methodist English High School as being. Whenever we have the matriculation exams, the person who stood first in the entire country would be from the Methodist school, and so on. So we were very much, engaged in education, and very well thought of school.
Mm.
And so, in fact, they had to start afternoon school soon after that as well, because there were just so many people who wanted to enroll. And so that was that part of it. So I did know that. And then Auntie Tokinji, as being very organized, very disciplined person, and then General Win with his highs and lows that personally I saw.
Mm.
Then, of course, Unu is a very gentle person. He lived that life, and he brought up his kids like that also, and so forth. But I remember vividly one time when we had these people, about 10 years into independence. It was a big thing for Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a Burma Britain thing, the Houses of Parliament, and all that. And my father was asked by UNU to represent Burma at that time,
Mm-hmm.
Britain Burma thing. And I think he was the deputy leader of the delegation. I'm not quite sure who it was. The leader might have been the Chief Justice. Uthai Mao, or I don't know, but I do remember I accompanied my parents to London. And we sat, with the children of these parliamentary members and so on. And then my mother went into the banquet with Lord Mountbatten, and my father with Lady Mountbatten, and all these kind of things. So I saw
Mm.
all of that, the pomp and the splendor and all this kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And then I think before that or after that, there were these visits from Britain. They would bring their children, I suppose, and then Ulenu, as I call him, would ask me to go to the compound, into the Prime Minister's residence compound, and kind of like socialize with these young, members.
Mm-hmm.
Children. And
Mm.
I recall very vividly, Unu had this long kind of a building, but it was like more like a corridor. At
Mm-hmm.
the end, he would have the Buddha, the altar, and with everything there, and that's where he would meditate. He would
Mm.
walk back and forth. We call it Xinjiang Shaoti. So
Mm-hmm.
he would walk back and forth, back and forth. That was his territory. And so when these kids were there, and myself too, we would, play around in the garden, and we'd be served tea and all that. So
Mm.
we all had the British way, our
Mm. Yeah.
staff would be wearing gloves and everything. And so we would do that. And these kids, of course,
Uh-huh.
would like to peek into this Unu's long where he would pray, I guess, his meditation.
Uh-huh.
And we were not allowed in there actually, but well, seeing they were foreigners and all, the staff said, okay, you may go. So they would go, and they wanted to touch, all the shrine, the head of the
Mm.
Buddha image and all. And then I remember Unu's son, I think Koao, I think the younger son would tell me, he would call me by my first name, and he would say, hey, you can speak English. Go tell them you can't do that. So
Yeah.
I would say, no, don't touch, don't touch. And then,
Uh-huh.
then we would all come out and all. I remember that also. But
Mm.
Ulenu, he was very sweet about it. He said, oh,
Uh-huh.
it's okay. And he said, I'm so glad, Malay, you are here because, these children, they did it because they didn't know and so on. So those years, I recall knowing all of them closely. They were very good years. It
Mm,
was unlike what happened in the next,
yeah.
decade after that. So that I can recall about those three personalities.
Yeah, sure. So, and then getting back to Aung San, after Burma was able to gain independence, he asked your father to work on the constitution. That's quite a big
Yes,
responsibility that's put on his shoulders. So,
yes,
I know that you didn't get to meet Aung San directly. You were
yeah,
quite friendly, as you mentioned, with his widow.
yes,
But obviously, your father and Aung San must have been close for Aung San to rely on him and trust him to do that. So, what do you remember of your father's impressions of Aung San as again, the stuff that the history books don't capture, who he was
yes.
as a person, what the relationship was like, what came out, and then beyond the relation with Aung San and Aung San's personality
Mhm.
and what he gleaned from that, just this process of writing the first constitution of a newly independent country. What was that like?
Mhm. I do remember a little bit about my father and my mother saying that
Hmm.
this is a very important time, and he's very important to Burma. And with the Tamador, and that we need the Tamador, which was like after the 30 comrades and all, which I
Mm,
also, Buyanai and all. Now we are by marriage related as well, but
hmm.
Boyanai and 30 comrades and all. And but I think my father and mother really um, liked Aung San as a person
Mm,
because they felt that he would always say it right to the point, blunt, you
mm,
know. He would say, and the only thing that is a bit different from the others who were working for independence was that he could be quite use these abusive words, when he's referring to maybe the Japanese or the Chinese or whoever, and he would speak that way. And but my father said we need him so much. And then I think, as you were saying, the trust I think has to do with the fact that my father was also uh, looked upon as as a young man with the Buddhist principles. I think that's
right.
right. I think General Aung San thought of him that way, or because my father was not a politician. He didn't, belong to
Hmm.
any political party. He was the only one was the Young Men's Buddhist Association, which was also very active in the nationalist movement. And then also the he, General Aung San seemed to trust my father because at that time too, the British was saying that you need a representative to because we didn't have our own I don't know what you call it, a legal the all of the most important cases would have to be resolved or settled in Britain, so we still didn't have that capacity. So my father was the constituent assembly. He was the representative, Burma's representative to this assembly, which is an all over powerful umbrella kind of thing. And so General Aung San, and that's why whenever they had the cabinet meetings in the secretariat, which is like a kind of a half moon thing, where you have two levels of this round thing, and General Aung San sit
Hmm.
in the middle, and then my father, the next level down, he is there on the right hand side of General Aung San, always, as an advisor to the then Constituent Assembly and to the then government, I think. So that I know that he was an important person. Even we realized that
Hmm.
because he was looked upon as the legal, because
Right.
Burma under the British And then soon after that, when the nationalist movement came, and then we had all the various nationalities, as we call them, the Shans and the Jins and the Kichins, and all wanting their autonomy, kind of, I think. And then they realized that we have to be a union of Burma. So I do remember that was one thing projected very strongly by the leaders at that time, that we needed, because we had the Karen's insurrection on one end that was happening. And then of course we had the Shans, who were, I think personally, when I was growing up, well, I grew up with the children of the first president of Burma, Sochitai.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sochitai. We grew up with Eugene and Ying, and Eugene passed away. He was my colleague in doing this activist work even. And of course, Han, the young boy, is now continuing. But so those years, and they felt that there needed to be a union. And so that was the first president. And of course, the Dr. Ba'u, and then Uema was Karen. And so we were all very close with all of them as well. So I knew these people also personally, and I knew more. I was because Soshita is already old, and he was not going to be. Socially going with us kids, but Mahadevi, his wife, was also influenced me on the way how she carried things and how she did things beautifully. Everything presented, the Shan food, the way they did this, and I was very, very impressed with her. And we used to go to the president's house to swim. They had an indoor pool, which unfortunately the army blew up and all that, so it's all gone. So we used to go there as well. So I do know that my father was looked upon as an advisor by Sochitai Sawati, as we call him, Sochitai, and Auntie Mahadevi also, who took care of us. She was the one that sent the car to send me to have my hair permed and all that, those days, that kind of thing. So, yes. I noticed that it was, they were building a very, very young democracy. And I'm so sorry that, all of this crumbled because the military wanted the power, because I think things were going all right. Then, of course, we had our first problems with the, when we had the breakup of, we always used to say, even when we were young, don't ever put 2 or 3 Burmese together, because you're going to find out that they will sit there and argue, unlike we say, like the Thais are very quiet, and he won't do that in those days anyway. But the Burmese, they were very spirited, independent, and always wanted to have their own say, and you couldn't agree. So then you can see that's happening, not only among Burmese. Well, Burmese, when you say Burmese, I mean, who's a Burmese? Burman. I'm a Burman, I guess. But my mother has relatives who were part of not the Chinese, but the Nonyas, the Muslim Chinese women like that. And then we had those kind of, and my father, of course, can be called a real Burman because his family started in upcountry, central Burma, and they had a very bad life. So they got on these big sailing, we call them Yuetli in Burmese, and they all came down to the Delta to find a better life. And then they became landowners and so on and so on. But I still have relatives up country, which in the very desolate kind of, country. And we used to laugh at them and say, oh, these people, they are bumpkins, country bumpkins. They don't know anything. But then when you look at our Sangha, I realized that like 90% of our well-known writers of the in the Buddhist world and all these big sayadaws all came from that area.
Right.
And so, we used to say that. But so in Burma, we had all this thing, and the lower Burmese are saying bad things about the upper Burmese as being
Yeah. Yeah.
not so sophisticated and so on. And so we have all these also, and in our writings. When I became interested in education, I realized too that we had a lot of this racist remarks,
Hmm.
about we have proverbs that then when Unu came, he wanted to address those. That's one of the things that Unu, in of course, he was into religion, and people were laughing because he was building sand pagodas or
Mhm.
things like that. But on the other hand, he wanted, and I remember that Burma and Thailand, the relations were very strained in the 50s, I think, and
Mhm.
even before that, those few years. And Ulenu sent my father on a goodwill mission to Thailand,
Hmm.
and we were invited. And my mother was ill at that time and couldn't go, so I went with my
Mhm.
father as a young girl. And the only place that that was had a big hotel was the Ratnagosin Hotel in Bangkok.
Mhm.
And that was the big hotel. Well, we already had the Strand,
Hmm.
and we had all these department stores, Tiju Miles, Rowe and Company, etc. Bangkok was kind of very quiet and didn't have
Hmm.
all these things that we already had. We
Mhm.
had these bookstores, Smart and Mukadam, and so on, Central Sports and so on. And we were a thriving Asian city. And then when we went over there, it was kind of drop and so on and so on. But the one thing I remembered very vividly was that we were welcomed in an official way with flowers and everything. And then they had this entourage. And then when we stopped to get out in the city, we had the Thai flag and the Burma flag together on these official limousines. And
Mhm.
then Thais that would go by would, when the cars were stopped and we got out, would spit at the Burmese flag,
Hmm.
Burma flag at that time. The,
Wow.
the feelings were so bad at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So actually, my father went there on a goodwill mission, Buddhist mission. They said
Hmm.
goodwill Buddhist. We only
Mhm.
did it like that. We had an audience with the king and everything. I mean, they welcomed us, but the feelings of the people were really very bitter against the Burmese. And so Unu had talked to my father and also the other educators, I think, through the ambassadors, that if we would remove the atrocities of the Burmese, what was it, 15th century or something, where we went, UTI and all these, and
Hmm.
and remove that and say that that we are not to project these atrocities, that in time of war it happened, uh, how uh, how uh, how bad, how evil, how bad the Burma army at that time was. And it was also, they were told it's all history. So, as a goodwill gesture, would you remove these? So I think they did. I don't know exactly, but was kind of successful. And at that time, uh, General Ne Win also would go to play golf, and he was friendly with the Thai generals and so forth.
Mhm.
So there was this, and as chief of staff, and I think Unu had talked to him also, and so forth. I don't know what happened later on, but I do remember that when we were there on an official capacity, that was feelings were very, very high and against the Burmese at that time. So I remember that as well.
Hmm. Right. And you mentioned the Pinland Conference. That's very important in terms of the nationalist movement, independence movement in Burma, where Aung San was able to gather a collection
Mhm.
of some ethnicities. I believe it was
Yes.
the Shan, the Chin, and maybe
Yes.
the Kachin that signed on and agreed to try a federal democracy for 10 years with the possibility of succession after that. Of course, the Karen famously didn't sign on for that, and the Karen
Mhm.
insurrection happened thereafter. But basically, Burma's been in a civil war ever since then.
Yes.
And so the Pinland Conference has been really controversial and has
Mhm.
been looked at in different ways according to different times and different perspectives as to
Mhm.
what it accomplished and where it fell short and everything else. And so, as someone whose father was actively involved
Mhm.
in that conference and the aftermath of that conference, because the conference is what allowed Aung San to then go to England and say, "Look, I meet the British demands of saying I
Yes.
have unified aspirations from these different ethnic minorities," and that was the impetus that allowed for independence. What do you remember of that conference and your father's role in it,
Um,
and what how he regarded it at the
yeah.
time, and then perhaps over the years? I don't know if his opinion changed looking back on it.
Yes, I do notice my father having a lot of discussions with the Shan leaders. I think that was the one of the most difficult part. I think for the Karen, I don't remember. I remember Mrs. Bamong Cheng, who was the first woman, I mean, in the cabinet at that time, and she's Karen, and Soba U and all these figures and all that. But I do think I think that the Shans were the most difficult to get together, at that time, and to sign away their feudal system, or to do away with that. I think was the most difficult part of getting them together. But they did finally. But I think in the constitution there is a clause that they had wanted it. In fact, I think that after so many years that they would become. I don't know the constitution that well, but I think there's a clause, and that's what happened when there was a problem when we had the House of Nationalities, and just like the British system, we had the two houses, representatives, and so forth. I remember that was difficult part was the getting the Shans together, but then everybody wanted independence. I know that everybody wanted independence. I heard that, and they were all saying, but to get to agree to that, because I think there was a time limit too that Britain said, if you have to get yourself all of you together, and then only you will get independence from us. And I think at that time, was it the Labour Party? Anyway, yeah, I remember the negotiations, and my father found it very difficult with the Shan leaders because they wanted out at that time. I mean, I don't know what they were asking for, autonomy or something. So then they all then signed on to make it a federal union, and I think that then they hastily signed it. And I remember one thing. My father used to smoke cigars, and then he was still smoking a cigar at that time, but then finally he after that he gave up, and he told all of us that nobody, smoking is very bad, after he'd been smoking all his life in front of us, and the pipe and everything. So
Mm.
but that time, I think I think my mother said that, oh, Panglong Conference is good because he gave up his cigar, maybe.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
something like that.
right,
But I don't know too much about that. All I know is what
sure.
what I heard about the difficulty with the Shans. I never heard anything
Mm.
uh, them saying anything about the Chins, but I do know that my parents were very friendly with the Chins also. Dua, Sama Dua, Sewanau, and all these other leaders, kitchen leaders. But and then close with the Korans too and the Shans. But I don't remember the Chins or the Kayas very, very much about that, you know. So
Right.
that's all I know about the Pin Loan, not very much.
Sure. Yeah. So your father was very influential in terms of government and the role he played, and there's still quite a bit more to explore there. But another role that he played in the country and in the development going forward was with Buddhism. And there's many stories to tell there in terms of how the influence he played within Burmese Buddhism at the time. And these are really the golden years of Burmese Buddhism in the 1950s and some of the monks that were coming across then. Before we get into understanding what he did exactly in a Buddhist context, I want to understand his Buddhist faith. And so if you can share a bit about how his Buddhist faith manifested. I'm sure there's the, traditional Burmese Buddhist kind of home life and
Yes.
rituals and holidays and such and customs. I'm sure that he probably followed those. But then beyond that, this was a time of where lay meditation practice was really taking off, and many people were discovering that they could engage in a Buddhist practice that wasn't simply honoring monks or listening to monks or giving to monks, but they could actually cut right into the core of the practice by going into meditation themselves, which wasn't really available in Myanmar, really anywhere in the world, just a decade or two prior. So this was really a new kind of environment to be able to engage in a Buddhist practice, unlike what had happened before. And your father was living through those years. He was brought up in the colonial period. He passed through the nationalist period and YMBA, as you mentioned, and the and World War II, and then went on to be a leading figure in government in these 1950s golden years where these teachings really took off. So what can you tell us about your father's Buddhist life, Buddhist faith, Buddhist practice? How did it manifest for him as a Buddhist practitioner?
The very first thing was that his parents, his father and mother, he was young, the youngest and only boy, and he from young he had this spirit of giving and helping his mom. His mother told me that he was 7 years of age, and they had to row across a pond, a lake, to go to the market, and he would accompany the the one member who was in the house who would go shopping, who would go marketing every day or so. So he would go do that before school. He would go and he would bring back. And so he was very much looked upon as a good, boy. And then he did all the Buddhist things. But I think his years of looking really into this religion might have been his years in Sri Lanka as well. I think Ananda College, it's a Buddhist college. We didn't have anything in Burma that, we had the monasteries, and then when they were young, as he did when he was young, instead of kindergarten, they would go to the monastery. The monks would bring them up. Those were the monastic schools. It's loosely woven. So he did have that. And then, of course, his own family. And then when he went to Sri Lanka and he was in the Ananda College and so forth, and he quite believed in it. And as a way of life, he used to tell us, Buddhism, and he used to tell us, you know what, this is the religion, and because we were studying the 100-Year War and all that, in history in school and so forth. And he said, this is the religion in which we never fought a war. Well, he's not. And then, of course, later on, we know that in Sri Lanka and all that. But in those days, he said, this is the only religion in the world, in which a war was never fought. And as we later on, we among our siblings, we used to say, ha ha ha, that's what he said. But look now, anyway. So I think going back to that, I think Sri Lanka had a lot of, and he had a lot of ties. I remember as we were growing up, and I do recall too that when we they had the tooth relic over, and the Sri Lankan government was very gracious to allow us for people to pay their respects at the Buddha's tooth from Kandy. So my father and my mother, myself including, I was sick, and we went on the British. We went by sea on one of these Bibby lines, Leicestershire, Worcestershire. I don't know which one was it that we went. It was, I think, like a 3-day thing to Colombo, and then taking the same, I think, another Bibby line ship back. We brought the tooth relic, and my father, again, I think he was deputy maybe of probably at that time, I think the Chief Justice Uthai Mao. I remember this. Uthai Mao was very strict and very grim, and he's we wouldn't dare run around in front of him. I remember even on the boat. And my father, but my father, of course, being the younger person, he was always the one who was doing this and that and so forth. So then we went in Kandy. They had this big thing, with the elephants and all that, and then they sent these drummers as well, the Kandian dancers and drummers, along with the boat to come. I don't know how long, maybe a week or so, that the tooth relic was there for people to come and pay their respects to that. I remember that my father was very pleased that he could go back and to his home where he grew up and all this and so on, and so that it was one of the things that I remember. And of course, my father was then he was the Secretary General of the Buddha Sasana Council, I think, which was maybe a little later on. And a general secretary, they call it. And my brother, after when my father came back out from jail after one of the coups, he too did that, but was assigned as he took that position as with the Buddha Sasana Council. So we did that, and then the next, and of course during all this time. I know that he was really deeply into Buddhism as a way of life, because that's what he taught us. He said, you don't have to go to any kind of a Buddhist a place, a stupa, or anywhere to go and pray in front and just recite all these that you don't even know what it is you are reciting. He said, I would like you all to know the essence of Buddhism. So he had a tutor for us. And I think he may have passed away, but he was a leading in his own area somewhere, Kamayo, where I don't remember. And every day we had lessons with him. Our Burmese lessons, he was our tutor. But then when he first come to the house and he comes, we have to fold our hands together because this was lost. The Thais kept this on. But we had lost this custom of folded hands and greeting people. We only do that to the monks. But in this case, whenever he came, Uke Maungji, his name was, he would come and then we would have to do that and all sit around and we do our lessons, tuition or something. And he would also recite when we wish him, well, of course, Burmese people say Mingala ba, but we have to say Bawatu Taba Mingala. So Bawatu Taba Mingala, it has a much more, that's how Mingala came from. So we always would have to put our folded hands in. So my father made sure that even he was busy, and my mother, they had us to be brought up with understanding. And I, of course, being the oldest, I would accompany my father on his missions to, for instance, he went to India, and I was a teenager, and I would listen to his lectures.
Mm.
Even though I didn't really pay attention, I mean, I did get most of it. And so it was later on I realized how valuable, how important those words were at that time. But I just heard. So if somebody asked me, what is Buddhism, I could say very clearly, oh, we have Theravada and Hinayana and so on. And Theravada is like this, Hinayana. But at least I could do those things because I went accompanied my father on these missions where he was invited to, these places. And I think the highlight of his Buddhist among the missions might have been to the Soviet states at that time, Latvia, Lithuania, and
Oh, wow.
Estonia, the three. And then he came back very much encouraged that Buddhism existed there. And in fact, later on, the monk from, I think, Latvia or Estonia, had to leave the country because of discrimination or something. The two of them left, the older monk and the younger monk, and they left and they wandered around and they ended up in Thailand. And then they wanted to come across to Burma, and my father facilitated them to
Whoa.
come to Burma, invited them,
Hmm.
and and then housed them at my mother's monastery, which
Oh.
is on the Shwedagon Pagoda on the first pavilion. There, if you go up the pagoda, before you reach the very top pavilion, there's one in the middle pavilion, and there we have monasteries and little buildings and so on. And my mother's parents had this monastery, but it was one part of the monastery was the monk that my mother had from her hometown, Pyondaza, and he was there. So these monks were in the basement, I think, of this. It still exists now. I don't know if the government took over or what. And so the two of them were there. And then whenever this monk, the younger monk, went with the begging bowl, they were children were teasing because they were wearing these robes, but were not like the ponjis that we have. They are different. They had these orange robes, and it was mostly very Western style thing. And so they were sometimes the kids would throw things and all. And my father was very upset about that. And then this younger monk, he was a pianist. He played the piano beautifully, and he had invited this monk to come and give us piano lessons as well.
Oh,
And
wow.
at the same time, my mother could, give them the morning meal, sort of. The old monk was there, and he couldn't travel very well. And they wore beards and all when they came. So to the Burmese people, this was really not something very, very strange. So I know my father was that religion, and they are Buddhists, and they escaped from this communist country, and here they are, and so on. And he had talked to the religious leaders also, and they all agreed that this is a good thing. And so we did that. That's one of the things that I remember my father good faith doing this. And as we grew up, and we did know these two monks that came, and that was the first time in my life that we had geography, but Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania were not in my mind. I mean, we knew Yugoslavia, but we didn't know that. And so that I would say would show that my father's deep feeling as a broader, part of that, not centered, that Buddhism. And another thing that he was upset about with my mother was that my mother would also be having the astrologers come over, for instance, and those people who say, we have the sight, we can hear, we can, all these things. And my father never believed in it. And he laughed and he said, it's just a waste of time. And he said, Buddhism is not that. And you don't have all these, like what Miao and Lion all are doing right now, propitiating the deities or the gods or something, the nuts, as we call it, the spiritual beings and all that. So my mother didn't actually, of course, propitiate them because her family didn't do it either, but she was interested because, a lot of people came and said, oh, this person can tell you what's going to happen 10 years. My father said, nobody can tell anybody. Just listen to the Buddha and you got to practice yourself. Nobody's going to, tell you ahead. We don't know. That's why we want to make sure that wherever we are in the next life, that we would, if you want to have a better life or something, you practice and you look into your own mind or some things like that. We also heard that, but we didn't pay attention. So my mother, and even she would go to these napwes, these where they have these women or men, and they would drink, and then they dance. These are these things that they have it in each of these little villages or towns outside of Yangon. And my mother would hear, and somebody would say, "Let's go," and then she would like to go, but my father prohibited her from doing that kind of thing. Don't even go. He said, how can you say that person is going to be able to have a clear mind when he or she is drinking and they dance and then the people give money and then they ask questions and that person supposedly is possessed by the spirit and the spirit is sprouting up, whatever it is you ask, or where's my dead husband or things like that. So my mother would secretly go a few times, and my father, if he found out, he would be very angry with her, and he told her not to let us do these things as well. So, but we didn't take these seriously anyway. We went to the Methodist school and we didn't even think about it. We just laughed at these things and we thought it was funny, So that was one of the things. And then, of course, whenever he went on these goodwill missions, on religious missions, and he was, I think, in Nepal. I think it's the coronation. I think, of course, I wasn't invited to go, just my mother and my father and so on. So my father felt that then the World Fellowship of Buddhists, when that happened, he was one of the founders of the World Fellowship of Buddhists, and I did meet and knew quite well Dr. Malala Sekura, who also is a Buddhist leader in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon. And he and my father were very good friends, and also from somewhere like in Malaysia, from Penang, because my father felt that because religion was there earlier on and it should, be revived. So they represented also from Malaysia, Penang, and very good friends with my father and doing that. And in saying that, the Seattle, I mentioned Penang, Seattle, he too did very well when he did this, when he went as a monk, Seattle over there. And in a predominantly Muslim country, he was able to set up this pagoda, build a pagoda and a temple and all that, and bring the Malay, the people to be Hinayana Buddhists, to be Theravada, because they were mostly the ancestor worship, the Chinese
Uh-huh.
way and so forth. So those are the things that I saw and I lived through with my father. And of course, when he went to
Mm.
1958, when he went to the United States, and he came here with my mother, and then it was quite an honor to represent the five great religions of the world and Buddhism. He represented Buddhism, and there was Hinduism, Judaism,
Mhm.
Christianity, and something else. I forget the five great religions of the world, and that's where he gave the address to. One was in Chicago, and the other one was in Star Island, New Hampshire, I think.
Mm.
And this is the book that in fact, I wish that I could distribute this lectures, because they are, when I'm reading them, I haven't really studied it, but I should be reading it well. And it's called Buddhism, the Religion in the Age of Science, something like that. And the Penang Sayadaw had a reprint on, and he sent many copies, and he distributed these copies to all the Buddhist places. But there were a lot of typos. It was done in Penang, and the first one was done in Sri Lanka by a Canadian. I think it's called the Buddhist Bible Society or something. So that's something I must do before I die, because it is my mother's wish.
Mm.
She told me that she would like very much for Daddy's these lectures that are very valuable, and she would like me to, see to the distribution of that, which is something that I should address. I haven't had the
Mhm.
chance because I have to do other things in my life, and so that's one of the things. So yeah, my father gave us the foundation and the grounding, and he also, I think, helped shape the lives of quite a lot of people in Burma. And of course, Mr. Goenka, one of them.
Mm.
Mr. Goenka was just one. He wasn't considered really a foreigner, because they lived in Burma. They grew up. I think he was born in Burma. I forget, but uh, and he. My father met him, and I knew him from his visits to the house. He would come, and in the tradition of that, he would bring us a lot of sweets and all. This is what we do if we go somewhere. We would take whatever, and then so he would bring, and it was nice, tallish, handsome person. And then my father told us that, oh, because my younger brother, also had this headaches. What do you call them? The headaches.
Migraine.
Migraine headaches that were not like the regular headaches. I suppose my younger brother had that too. So my father said that when Mr. Goenka said to him, "Oh, I've gone so many places, and here in Burma also, I've tried so many things, so much medicine, modern medicine, etc." And Daddy thought that perhaps he could do this meditation. So I think he introduced him to U Ba Khin's meditation center, I think. And so I'm not familiar with U Ba Khin's meditation, only Mahasi Sayadaw's, because that was a fun place too. As children, we would go there and we would run
Mm.
around, and the Sayadaw was also very nice, smiling and talking to us and all that. That was nice. I didn't like religion where we will have to, be far away from the monk.
Mhm.
The monk can only tell us, and we can't say anything back to the monk. That kind of thing. So I never liked that. But anyway, Uba Khin's. From my friends would tell me that, oh, very strict, you have to breathe in, breathe out, and this and that. And I said, oh no, I don't think I want to do that. So I never did
Mhm.
get to U Ba Khin's, but my father, then of course, I heard that Mr. Goenka later on, that was long before my father passed away too, that Mr. Goenka thanked my father that it was the only way that this migraine left him. because of his meditation and so forth. And so now we know that he has set up so many, and they are, and he's doing such good things for the Buddhist world by talking about his own experiences and what it is that, and also that Buddhism is not a hocus pocus, or that if you pray a lot you will get this or something. Yes, but uh, those things, I know that some of the good things that my father did, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and the Fifth Buddhist Synod, excuse me, I'm sorry, I wanted to mention that a convening of this very important meeting, and so that was also what he participated in.
And so staying on SN Goenka and U Ba Khin for a bit, have a few questions about that. I know that practitioners in that tradition are listening with on the edge of their seat, I think, because this is, this can't really be understated or underemphasized. This the importance of what you're describing here. I mean, you're talking about your father in his position knew a young Indian businessman who was suffering from these migraines, and also knew of the great Buddhist teachers that had different programs and methods and styles. And he was the connector. And by, serendipity, by karma, by fate, whatever you want to call it, your father was in this nexus where he lit the match that Goenka would go on to sit the course and then play this major role in the worldwide mindfulness movement. I mean, any listener that is paying attention right now that is from the Goenka tradition, or even from an offshoot mindfulness tradition that benefited by the U Ba Khin Goenka mission that was then launched after the 1950s, your father was the one that initiated all of this. Without him, this connection wouldn't have been made. So this is an incredible moment just to sit on and consider and reflect the incredible importance of how this came to be. So with that in mind, I guess my first question, I'm just wondering, I think that in those that follow Goenka and see Goenka as a teacher, they know him as an older, mature, well-practiced meditation teacher and meditation practitioner who has already developed from the path of all of these courses and following all these instructions. But you and your father met him before he ever took a course. I mean, indeed, your father was the reason he took a course, was the introduction to that type of teaching. So did you meet Goenka before that first IMC course? Or in talking to your father, what impressions can you give us about, the pre-meditation Goenka? What was he like before he ever sat that course? What do you remember about him personally?
I remember him as he's fair-skinned, and he was a young, as you say, businessman, and who was very attractive in the way he spoke, and things like that. And he would come to the house, and my father and my mother welcomed in some Buddhist tradition, and the Burmese way would welcome him, and he would bring his gifts of on a tray of, I don't know, I want to say sweetmeats kind of thing and all, and very pleasant. But I also remember that my father saying to him, we have so many different ways of meditation centers here also, and why don't you try? I don't think my father really knew that, if you go to U Ba Khin's, his is the only one that can help you. I don't think there was that.
Right.
He just said, why don't you try U Ba Khin's? Because I have a feeling that because your concentration or something like that, because this migraine would go away. Not scientific, but why don't you try? Because at that time we also had the other meditation centers, as I told you, Mahasi.
Oh, sure.
One for Mahasi is very big and very.
Yep.
And my mother went to meditate there also afterwards. That was Goenka was the earlier years, and my mother didn't go to U Ba Khin's, but always went to this one. And I wondered, why he didn't go, because U Ba Khin's was supposedly, from what I hear, very strict. And the other meditation over at the other monastery was good, but many of the wives, of the cabinet wives, and many of my mother's friends went there. And I know also in the later years when my mother went, I would go and drop her the food. They had the food there, but they didn't quite like the food, what was given there, what was cooked there. So we would offer food, and we said we gain merit by bringing food for those people who are meditating, so on. So yes, I was very surprised later on when Mr. Goenka became a Buddhist leader, and that he gained so much from U Ba Khin's meditation center, which I do know. My father said, "Why don't you try this one? Why don't you try?" I mean, he didn't insist because I don't think Daddy never went and sat for any meditation. He never had the time to do it. They were very busy with the years of the new government and, all of that. So that I remember. And Mr. Goenka, very wealthy and all, I know, because he would come with the driver in the car and all that.
Oh, right.
And he would. So that's all I remember, very polite and all that. But later years, much, much later, after my father passed away, also this, as I told you, by marriage, Boyan Nai, who was one of the 30 comrades, his wife became very much, into this, how to, I think, teach meditation through this Mr. Goenka's method. And in fact, she was one of the teachers of meditation, I think, following this. And I think that may have been also influenced by my mother to the wife of Boyanai, and so on. So there is that connection. That was long after my father passed, and then long after, but then by then, Mr. Goenka's method, a way of meditating, or his meditation, took on a life of its own, with all teachers opening and, people studying actually, and how to become teachers for this. And she was one of them. And
did you, as you saw Goenka's mission starting to grow, were there moments where you like pinched yourself and you were like, my father started all of this? My father is, I mean, obviously he didn't start the mission, but, your father started, maybe is the wrong word. Your father set in motion what has become a worldwide phenomenon. It has reached, Dhamma has reached, the Buddhist teachings have reached to places in the world through Goenka that it's never reached before in human history. And do you ever have a moment where you just pinch yourself and you think, my father set this all in motion? Really?
I have to laugh because, all this was going on. And then only recently, in the last 10 years or so, I suppose, when I had this in my mind, the mission of setting up the first Theravada Buddhist temple, monastery here in Northern Virginia. And I came in touch with this one monk, and he came here on a visit, and a long story. And then he was from the Kabai Buddhist University. He was a graduate of that as well, a youngish one. He came and then he was here and so on. And so then we were able to establish this monastery here, register it and so on in the Commonwealth of Virginia and all that. And so then he started having these every week, so to keep us to go and do the sermons. And then when I opened one of these books and all that, and I was looking, and he says, "Oh, this book is, and Chan Htoon was the one, and so of this book, and so on, and prayer book." And so I said, "Oh, I knew my father was, always involved with this." But I said, "Oh my goodness." Then every one of these books that I opened, they had my father's name also. And then also these things that came up, and people talk about Goenka, and people like even my friend Kit, for instance, she was going to go, and then she read about it, and she said, "Oh, your father was the one who introduced Mr. Goenka." And so now,
Mm,
lately only, I must admit, I'm thinking, oh yes, yeah, he did do that, and in all these prayer books and all, and people, the older, and all the monks would come for a visit here also, where some of the monks I know by name, and so they would look for me, and I would see them, and we would always go back over and discuss, and they would say how much they are indebted to U Chan Htoon for
mm,
doing his part of it,
right.
uh, bringing Buddhism, the real Buddhism as they call it, to people, and how much it is needed now when we don't
Mm,
have anything to hang on to. They said, now with these things happening in the wink of an eye in front of us, the coup, the killings, the
yeah.
everything, and
Yeah.
that this is only thing that we can hang on to, and we can't do
Mm,
anything for our relatives either. You can only do this for yourself, and how, so now only in my old age I
mm,
begin to realize the importance and the work that he did for the sadhana, and
yeah.
I fully appreciate so much now. And as I say, I hadn't paid much attention to this, to tell you the truth, because it all happened, and
Yeah.
we're all living, Buddhism. It's a way of life. I go to the temple. I go here. We have sunjui at home. We feed the
Uh-huh.
monks, and things like that. It's a way of life. And
Yeah.
so here you got to look for it, to learn, to have to do it. That is why when I help set up this,
Mm,
well, we don't have money to do it, or you need money to do anything anywhere. But we got together, friends of friends, and now we have the monastery. It's not near my house anymore because we couldn't afford to rent or to buy. So it's in Nokesville, which to me is like the end of the world. It's kind of far. It's
mm,
like an
mhm.
hour's drive, almost an hour's drive in I don't know if it's Prince William County or somewhere. So, yes, that is one thing I felt that I was able to do, in memory of my parents who had given us this, this grounding, and had helped so many other people. And this is one way that I could do. So I helped set up this, and I'm still the president of the association. And
Mhm.
so
Um,
that's a little thing.
yeah, I'd like to just ask a couple other questions about this connection between that your father played in being able to introduce Goenka to U Ba Khin. And I think there's, I also just want to venture. I think there's probably a number of dedicated Vipassana practitioners around the world
Mhm.
that have come to learn meditation through the tradition of SN Goenka that are listening now, that are probably some of them something in awe and something in just gratitude that, they're learning about this one action role that your father took on that
Yes.
has delivered the technique to them, has delivered this practice to them. This is no small thing. And going off more on that interaction and your father's role in that, you mentioned a bit about how familiar you were with SN Goenka as a young businessman pre-meditation
Yeah.
coming to your house,
Hmm.
and just describing him as a generous, jovial fellow, bringing some sweets and
Yeah.
being charismatic and quite friendly and easy to talk to. After he took his meditation course, did you meet him after that? Did you meet him right after? Did you meet him in the years after? And what changes, if you did meet him, or perhaps if your father was connected to him and relayed the information to you, what changes in his personality and behavior and character and such? Was there anything discernible that was noticed after he started taking these courses?
Yes. I just remember Daddy saying that. Uh, that Mr. Goenka had been cured. He had
Right. Yeah.
no longer suffering from his,
Mm.
and that he's done very well. And he said to us, look, what can be accomplished and all. That's why he always is talking about religion as in this kind of meditation and
Right. Right.
thinking as being scientific. He always
Uh-huh.
wants to tell us then, and we always used to think that was like, oh, what is he talking about, that kind of thing. We never really we just listen because we really don't talk back. But in our household, though, he made sure that we ask these questions if we want,
Mm.
without being yelled at or say don't ask or something. So yeah, that was one thing
Mm.
that he said, that, oh, it's very so I wondered why, because I'd heard U Ba Khin's meditation center very strict,
Mm.
and that people have to be like, you have to stay like meditation centers where retreat, but other
Mm.
retreats where in a big open area, blah blah blah,
Mm.
sort of thing. But this was like being in confinement or something to me.
Mm. Mm.
And I said, oh, we thought that this young man, this man, Mr. Goenka, he must be really strong. And we would joke by saying, oh, yeah, of course, he's not Burmese. That's why he can do it. Because we always say about
Mm.
putting three together, we can't get along. And we're happy-go-lucky people, mostly. And we don't do these things kind of thing. And so we didn't really take it that serious.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's really interesting. So we've been focusing a bit on your father's relationship to Esen Goenka. I want to ask a question about your father's relationship to Sayaji U Ba Khin. U Ba Khin has a similar background to, I think, to your father's trajectory, as well as some of these other young Bamar leaders at the time, or middle-aged Bamar leaders. By this time, U Ba Khin came from extremely poor backgrounds, and based on the academic prowess that he showed, he ended up getting a full ride scholarship to
yes,
St. Paul's,
yes.
and that led the way for him to develop an education, which got him as a clerk in the accountant general's office. This was mostly staffed by Indian workers at the time, pre-independence. The Indians didn't really want the Bamar around because they wanted their own kind there, and they would haze the Indian workers, would haze the Burmese to be
Yeah.
able to drive them out. And U Ba Khin was the only Bamar worker that was able to withstand this hazing and remain as a junior clerk in the office. Then after independence happened and the Indians left the government and many went back to India and were repatriated there, U Ba Khin was the only Bamar. He was a junior clerk, but he was the only Bamar left standing in the office. And so by that account, he was named the accountant general, and then went on to head other departments, one time simultaneously heading 4 departments in the government in the 1950s at that time. And so he was also a key minister in these pivotal 1950s years. And I'm wondering, with your father also involved with the workings of government and some of these key leaders, what relationship did he have formally to U Ba Khin? How did he work with them, as well as informally as a Buddhist practitioner? And U Ba Khin was doing something really quite revolutionary at the time, as being a layperson that was trying to offer meditation courses, strict meditation courses, in your words, very quite a lot of discipline and instructions, and was starting to launch this somewhat new initiative. So as far as your father goes and his personal professional relationship with U Ba Khin, what can you tell us about that?
I don't know. I never met U Ba Khin, but my father had always thought of him as being this disciplined person, and how he made a self-made kind of a person, and into religion.
Mm-hmm.
In religion, that his father was not a monk, or some people who had some background like that.
Right.
And he said that he did very well in becoming that kind of a person. And then my father always had a big respect for the meditation per se, as the answer to your life, where you control your discipline. My father was a very disciplined person
I
also.
see. Right.
Get up at this time, you do this, do that, and all that kind of thing. So he tried to tell us about that. And U Ba Khin's name was always mentioned by my father and my mother, and they're always talking, and they're always sending their friends to U
Oh,
Ba
really?
Khin's meditation center. Yes. They would refer. They said you should go because U Ba Khin's, and I think it was somewhere out in the suburbs as well. I mean, not too far from where we were. I think we were
In Yam Yang.
yeah, Iamyai. I remember Iamyai. And at that time, we were living in the government house, which was the first Burmese person to live there. It was the home of the Chief Justice of Burma. It was always habited by the British people. And it had a huge compound and a beautiful house. It's what you would call a mansion now, I guess. And then we had one place. It's a library and all that. And then, of course, in those years, 1950s, so we had to have a barbed wire all around it because of kidnappings and all that kind of. We had guards.
Oh, wow.
We had guards there. Yes, four from the Gurkhas. Gurkha guards, and we had a big staff place in there. That's where they stayed, and so on and so on. But I know that my father had great regard for U Ba Khin. He must be younger than my father. I don't know. When my father passed away, he was 82 years of age. He passed away in 1988, before the uprising. He didn't see what happened. He didn't see. So he was he was born in 1906. So yeah. But I think U Ba Khin may be younger than him, or they are the same age. I'm not sure. But I always hear about this U Ba Khin being vibrant and all that. That's why in my mind he may be younger. My younger sister, who then of course earlier on in my years, I left the house to get married very young. And my younger sister would remember all this because when my father would have, after the military released him, he had these Dhammapada classes, at home for relatives and friends. And Dhammapada, he had one teacher come and they would learn the Dhammapada at home. And so, but I have no connection with U Ba Khin, and I don't know. All I know is what I hear from my parents, and then in regard to Mr. Goenka as well.
Do you know why your father recommended U Ba Khin? You mentioned that there were a number of different teachers and centers operating at that time. Do you know if he offered Goenka like different options, and U Ba Khin was the one that chosen, or U Ba Khin was the one that Goenka chose, or did he specifically say this is the one you should do? How did it come across to recommend that tradition particularly?
Right. It's curious because as I told you, my mother went for meditation. I mean, she stayed there weeks at a time at the Mahasi, the
Mahasi, okay.
place. And Mahasi place is a big, it's a big compound, and it had a big sima, the ordination hall, and all this kind of thing. And Mahasi Siaro himself was there and all the time, but he didn't recommend. For one thing, I think because U Ba Khin was more proficient with the language, maybe English or something. I'm not sure. Than Mahasi Siaropia, So I think that's one thing. And the other thing too is I think for somebody like Mr. Goenka, who had gone through everything, as he said to Daddy, I've gone to Europe, I've gone to this, I've gone to, medical, science, I've gone to this hocus pocus things too, and everything, and nothing seemed to have worked. So I think my father said that in his mind that this would be the best fit, I think, because there were other meditation centers, and of course, primarily with Unu and the wife, the cabin, everybody was going to Mahasi, Mahasi's way of meditation and so on. So I think that may be it, because of the discipline and the fact that his was a, I don't want to say serious, because
Yeah.
I'm not knocking Mahasi's
Sure.
because I don't know much about it to say this, but I think that may be the reason that Daddy felt that U Ba Khin is the one that would, that would be best to guide Goenka.
And then did your father? You say that he passed away in the late '80s. That was
Yes.
when Goenka's mission had taken off by that point, but it certainly wasn't anywhere near what it became. Did
Yes.
your father, was he aware in his older age what Goenka had gone on to do with that technique, and how did he regard that?
Yes, he was, because I remember he was saying, "Oh, look, anything is possible. Anything is
Mm,
possible, and you can just see Goenka. Look at Goenka, this young
mm,
man who was not Buddhist even. He was Hindu,
mm-hmm,
and who was the Hindu community. He was, I think, Goenka's family, being businessmen and rich, they were leaders of the Hindu community. We had
right.
large Hindu community, and we were very close to the Hindu community, because at that time my father was doing something about the and during Eid time, not Eid, during Ramadan, before Ramadan and
Mm,
all that,
mm,
and for Eid, how they would take the cows, and
mm-hmm,
then slaughter them, and that
mm-hmm,
was meritorious deed for them, sort of thing.
mm-hmm,
So my father had organized one thing with the Hindu community, a film where they filmed these cows that were being, herded off to the slaughterhouse, and they literally had the cows crying. You see these eyes on the. We saw this,
mm-hmm.
and he would show, and he said, how killing is bad, something. And he worked. I don't know what it is called, but somewhere I wish somebody would look for this, with the Hindu community. And that's why I think one of the reasons my father and Mr. Goenka came to meet is because my
Oh,
father
I
was
see.
very active with the
Mm,
Hindu community, doing things against not against, I shouldn't say that, for the people who were being, the Muslim, the
mm,
inheritance laws and their laws where they marry the Burmese women, three, and then leaving them if they don't have a boy child and all those things.
mm,
I remember, and how that religion is affecting a lot of people, because there were poor people, with
mm-hmm,
given in marriage the parents, especially in the agricultural community. And so my father, for awareness, he worked with the Hindu community to bring about this kind of behavior that this religion was bringing to the people, and how we have to do the inheritance laws and all that.
mm-hmm,
I know it had to do something with the legal aspects of it too. And that's the reason that my father was very close to the Hindu community. So, and
mm-hmm.
that's how Goenka, I think, met my father, is through all the work that my father did with the elders of the community there. And so, he was not a Buddhist. They had their own Hindu temples, and they did their own things. And we would also take part in the eating part of these festivals, and we would
Right.
go and we would take part in it, but we never were you know uh, that way with the Islam community. Although many friends would give us a lot of bring food and stuff whenever they have to eat. They bring great big tiffin carriers with the food to us and all, and I think. Those years influenced also my parents in the later years
Mm,
not eat beef, because they did
right.
in the beginning, but then we didn't. And my father told us that that is one thing. And of course, he told us in the sense that the cows were our friends, and you know how we need them in the agricultural part of it, all the farmers and all the kind of thing he used to tell us, so that we won't just be against, that. But no, I think with Goenka, it was through the Hindu community and the awareness my father was doing that he met him. And then Goenka approached him to help him, because I think he was at wit's end as to what else to do, as he was getting so, sick with this migraine.
Yeah, I'd like to actually read something that Goenka wrote in his later years, reflecting on this period and referencing your father. He wrote,
Yes.
quote, "It was 18 years ago. My physicians in Burma advised me to get myself treated in foreign countries. Otherwise, there was a danger of becoming a morphine addict. I was suffering from a severe type of migraine since my childhood, the intensity and frequency of which had increased with the years. Even the best doctor in Burma had no treatment for it, except that he administered a morphine injection whenever I suffered from an attack, which came about every fortnight. This was certainly not a treatment. That is why they warned me against there was a danger of my starting to crave for morphine, not because of the headaches, but because of my gradual addiction to it. On their advice, I made a trip around the world for months together, and was under the treatment of some of the best doctors in Switzerland, Germany, England, the United States, and Japan.
Yes.
But it was all in vain. It proved a sheer waste of time, money, and energy. I returned no better. At this stage, my good friend, Kalyan Mitra, U Chan Htoon, who later became a judge on the Supreme Court of the Union of Burma and president of the World Fellowship of Buddhists, guided me to Sayagyi U Ba Khin. I shall always remain grateful to him and shall keep on sharing with him all the merits that I accumulate while treading this noble path." So that's something that Goenka said about your father. How does it feel hearing that?
Yeah, it's wonderful. I feel so good. I wish my mother, more than my father, would be here to hear this, because she was always, she was the one as a hostess in the house when Goenka would come, and
Right.
would bring these sweetmeats or whatever on these trays. I remember. Then she would, whatever it is that she would send from our garden, maybe papayas or I don't know what, but things like that. At the exchange of that, and my mother would welcome him and all that. I remember my mommy would be so, pleased and have such a good feeling to hear this kind of thing, about my father. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Did you ever happen to know Leon Wright?
No.
Leon Wright was an African-American diplomat in the 1950s who was a Christian, but he learned from U Ba Khin, and he was also appointed a teacher when he came back to America. And he was, I don't know if you know Ukole, but Ukole had resisted learning meditation from U Ba Khin or anyone, because he was kind of this modern Burmese that had thrown the shackles off of traditional Buddhist experience. And when Leon Wright was giving a seminar on what he learned from U Ba Khin in Washington, D.C., Ukole happened to attend and was amazed that there was this American diplomat who had gained a better understanding of Buddhist practice than he had. And that sent Ukole to take a course at IMC and developed his friendship with U Ba Khin.
And Ukole, the name is very familiar. What did he do?
Ukole was another one of these figures, like all the ones that we're talking about, including your father, that had grown up in colonial Burma, had gone through the nationalist and independence movement, and had had come from humble origins, and through working hard education and taking advantage of new opportunities that weren't there before, was able to take on a number of roles. I know that he was rector of the University of Mandalay. Ukole did a number of other things as well, but then, as is the case with others, once he got into meditation, and he was involved in Mahasi as well as U Ba Khin, he became, I don't know exactly what he did or what his role was, but I know that he was a big supporter of both Mahasi and U Ba Khin, and one of those big names that's out there. He's the uncle also. I mean, Burma's such a small world, he's everyone's related.
Yes.
He's the uncle of Matanagi as well.
Tengi. Oh, I see. Tengi's uncle. I see.
Yeah.
thingy. Yes, I know her I don't know her very well, but I do know her. Yes, and the reason maybe I don't know too much is Mandalay, because the rector of Dr. Tiao and all were when we were growing up was the rector of Rangoon University, and he wrote many books and folk tales of Burma, and that whole family is very well educated and so on. No, but
Right.
the name is familiar. That's why Kuli.
Right, and then of course Sao Shui Thaek, the first president of Burma, the Shan that you referenced, he was also a practitioner at IMC and a good friend of U Ba Khin.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, Sawaji. He was old, as I remember, when he became the president, and but the Shans respected. He was Nyang Shui Savoy, and he was very much respected also. And there's many children. We all grew up together, and those names are all coming back. It's so many years ago, and
I'm sure. Yeah,
it's yeah.
Yeah, and so we've spent quite a bit of time talking about this U Ba Khin Goenka connection, which is quite important, and I'm glad that we spent the time on it. But this was also a golden age of Buddhism and of meditation practice in Myanmar, these 1950s, and much of that was spurred on by the Buddhist faith of U Nu, which, of course, is as much as he did to open up the practice and to encourage not just traditional ways of Buddhism, but also more modern, you can call it modern Buddhism or Protestant Buddhism, and the science behind it, and the actual meditation, not just the faith part. He did a lot to sponsor different initiatives to take off. Also, it's also controversial. I know that there were Shan Buddhists that felt that that their type of Buddhism was being a bit overwhelmed. There was also the Kachin rebellion started because U Nu wanted to make Buddhism a national religion. Yet at the same time, U Ba Khin's career took off because the way that U Ba Khin started was that there was a government circular that was passed by U Nu that was encouraging ministers to be able to have shrines in Buddhist shrines in their public office, and not just shrines, but to hold precepts and even have Dhamma talks. So U Ba Khin took advantage of this, and that was the origin of IMC. Was the initial Dhamma talks and then later meditation courses in the weekend that would happen actually in the accountant general's office. Yes. But in this whole milieu and whole environment, you don't just have U Ba Khin. We've already referenced Mahasi, but you have this golden age of Burmese meditation-oriented monks. You have Webu Sayadaw, Monyin Sayadaw, Sunlun Sayadaw, Mogok Sayadaw, all these huge, giant names that have since established their traditions that still exist to this day, and that have, in some cases, have literally millions of followers, and in some cases have gone outside to dozens of countries around the world. So concerning these real great monks, these famous names, these giants of meditation practitioners, which of these did you or your family or your father start to have contact with? What can you tell us about personal encounters that you had or that your father relayed, or your mother even, that put you in proximity to some of these real great giants of the mindfulness movement?
I don't remember all the names. Of course, Mahasi Sayadaw is one of them. And then when we went overseas, when my father went on these Buddhist missions, so it always we accompanied the leaders would be the Sayadaws and so forth. But I remember when U Nu was, when you brought up this about the state religion, he wanted to make Buddhism the state religion. And we have a lot of different faiths, of course, and we do, even up to this day, celebrate Christmas and the Muslim festival and the Hindu and all these kind of things. But when U Nu was going to do that, there was he set up I suppose an investigative kind of thing, and the mission was, it was again headed by the Supreme Court Justice U Teng Mao, and my father was the deputy, and we went on this boat they still have that boat. It's a beautiful boat, all up and down the Irrawaddy. And we stopped at all these places, and it was arranged to have meetings with these Buddhist, with these Christian leaders, or Muslim leaders, or Hindu leaders, or leaders to talk about the religion as being how important it is, I suppose. And I was on that boat with my parents. My mother was there too, my father, and the other members. And so we stopped it and talked to all these mostly Catholic leaders, and so on and so on. And I they of course I did not see any kind of like any big discussion at that time when I would go with them and sit in and listen. They would tell this, the government's part of it, why we need to have this as a state religion, and what listening to these other religious leaders. And that I didn't find it, it was mostly very very good. They would go and then they would have these talks and all that, but then on the other hand, I felt from my friends and all that the feeling was that we don't need a state religion, because we have Buddhists, and what 99% are all Buddhists. So why do we want to make it official? Was
Yeah.
by the younger people, I think, of my age, they weren't too bothered about this. Whatever happens, they're okay. But this was the feeling, and I personally, I think that was a wrong move to go. But there was a lot of money spent because we went on this boat. It was a beautiful boat. I think they still have it. They keep it for official visits and so forth. And to go, but he did. Unu did the right thing by conferring with all the religious leaders, because we definitely have a presence of, the missionaries has established quite a lot of these. We can only look at Judson Chapel in Rangoon to see also, and my friends who are Christians and Catholics, and of course Catholics. We have all these churches as well, but that was my feeling. But I was part of that, and I'm very I feel very very good that I was there when this historic thing was going on, this plan, so to speak. But I didn't think too much, because I was at the age where I didn't. To me, it was a beautiful trip. We were hosted everywhere we stopped, with drums and all this, and really very welcome by that. And then the names of these the Seadors. I cannot, all these names come to my mind, but I can't pinpoint exactly which one. But all these Seadors, yes, I did grow up with those Seadors closely. In fact, as I was saying, the Penang Seador, Upinyawanta, Vamsa, I think Pinyavamsa, he when he did the missionary work in Penang and all that, and I didn't pay attention. So when he came to the United States, before he passed, anyway, he was looking for U Chan Htoon's daughter, and he remembered U Chan Htoon's daughter, older daughter. He said, "I would like to see, where is she?" So he asked and my friend said, "Oh yeah, of course." And then they contacted me and they said, "Oh, Pinyawanta would like to meet with you." I said, "I do remember Pinyawanta, but I said I had no idea that he was in Penang, set up this, and so on." So he came to the house, and we talked, and I went to see him. And sadly, he set up this big building and had a kind of a school, which the government took over, confiscated. And I went there, and he was there, I think in 2018 or so, when I went for my when I was teaching the the program, training teachers. And I went to see him because he was there, and it was sad. His own building, the one he set up himself, beautiful. There were grounds. There was a big, tall, 3-4 levels elevator and all. And he was only in one room on one floor because the rest was under the military.
Mm-hmm.
And so, these things, and that was very depressing. And that was the last time. And then he came to the U.S. also, and he set up one on Long Island. And I went to see him, pay my respects. And then he was not feeling too well. And then he went back, and then he passed. But his legacy is very great. Also, he had done this achievement in the Muslim world to be able to have this temple in Penang, a huge one, and have all these people, Buddhists, and you have the nuns as well, Buddhist nuns as well. So, because nunnery was another thing that my father felt very strongly about, because it was a dying thing. And it was gone in Thailand. He always regretted that in Thailand that there were no nuns, and that we still had a vibrant kind of nunnery, nuns there. And I myself was a nun. I went into the nunnery when I was about 8 or 9. And that was that nunnery is still in existence, and my parents helped with them. Not only my parents, but UNU and other people also. And they took in orphans, actually, young girls or maidens, and none of the married women were being initiated there. Only those who were, we call them Nebu, means the little ones. And that's how, and I was there also, along with Unu's younger daughter, and I stayed the longest. And I didn't want to leave because it was so much fun. You had so many, your age, and running around, and we learned our scriptures, but we were allowed time to play too. So I like that very much. So I really did have a background of growing up a true Buddhist, Theravada Buddhist background. I must say, I was fortunate.
Boy, that is, all of this information is just so valuable and so insightful to know. And I realize we're about at the 2-hour mark, and we're probably only up to about 1961 or so. We've yet to get to 62 and 74 and 88 and 07 and then 21. There's a lot to talk about in terms of the role that your father would play during these moments, and then the role that you would play in it, and as well as your commentary in what happened in going from a colonial state to World War II, transitioning into a rocky, semi-democratic period in the 1950s, and then terrible decades of being closed off in military dictatorship. I think to really do justice and really make sure that we get a proper understanding and give time to tell these stories in the way they deserve to be told, I would propose that maybe we pause at this point and come back and put this into a part 2, and to be able to continue this conversation and continue to tell this story of you and your peers and your father, and invite you to come back and continue that conversation. But for now, this has just been so enthralling and so wonderful to hear your words and stories and all of this. And I just thank you so much for taking the time and join and generously, graciously sharing your time and your stories.
I thank you also very much for bringing light to not only Buddhism, but to some of the events that have taken place in Burma. So I thank you so much.
Many listeners know that in addition to running these podcast episodes, we also run a nonprofit, Better Burma, which carries out humanitarian projects across Myanmar. While we regularly post about current needs and proposals from groups on the ground, we also handle emergency requests, often in matters that are quite literally life or death. When those urgent requests come in, we have no time to conduct targeted fundraisers, as these funds are often needed within hours. So please consider helping us to maintain this emergency fund. We want to stress that literally any amount you can give allows us to respond more flexibly and effectively when disaster strikes. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go on to support a wide range of humanitarian and media missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, refugee camps, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects, as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution to a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit card. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we can take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either website for specific links to these respective accounts or email us at info@betterburma.org. That's Better Burma, one word, spelled BETTERBURMA.org. If you would like to give in another way, please contact us. We also invite you to check out our range of handicrafts that are sourced from vulnerable artisan communities across Myanmar, available at alokacrafts.com. Any purchase will not only support these artisan communities, but also our nonprofit's wider mission. That's Aloka Crafts, spelled ALOKACRAFTS, one word, alokacrafts.com. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.
May all beings be happy, and may peace prevail in the world.